is going on, and I keep reading Somerset Maugham up at the villa. In the previous episode, I am outraged about the classical style of descriptions. I recite two really long ones about people and about nature. Practically, that's all. Dividing my presentation into 3 parts turned out to be a very wise idea. The first part was concentrated in description. That is, by the way, a good method of slowing down everything and making your reader just like stop and stare. So, and the second part, this part, is based on the second chapter. And I think the key of this part of the presentation would be showing the main characters through their opinions, people's opinions about them. The first character we are going to meet in this chapter is Rowley Flint. Would you trust anybody with the name Flint? Associatively, it calls for adventurers, pirates, or somebody like that. So, let's see if we are mistaken. "You're an awful scamp, Rowley, and you're not even good looking enough to excuse it. But we like you," she said. It was true that Rowley was not much to look at. He had a tolerable figure, but he was no more than average height, and in clothes he looked thick-set. He had not a single feature you could call good. He had white teeth, but they were not very even. He had a fresh color, but not a very clear skin. He had a good head of hair, but it was a vague brown between dark and fair. His eyes were fairly large, but they were in pallid blue that is generally described as grey. He had an air of dissipation, and people who didn't like him said he looked shifty. It was freely admitted, even by his greatest friends, that he couldn't be trusted. He had a bad record. When he was only just over 20, he had run away and married a girl who was engaged to somebody else, and 3 years afterwards he had been correspondent in a divorce case, whereupon his wife divorced him and he had married not the woman who had been divorced on his account, but another, only to leave her 2 or 3 years later. He was now just over 30. He was, in short, a young man with a shocking reputation, which he thoroughly deserved. You would have said there was nothing to recommend him, and Colonel Trail, the travelling Englishman, tall, thin, weather-beaten, with a lean red face and grey toothbrush moustache, and an air of imbecility, wondered that the princess had asked him and his wife to meet the damned rotter like that. "I mean, he's not the sort of fella," he would have said if there had been anyone to say it to, "that a decent woman ought to be asked to sit in the same room with." Well, every family had its black sheep. But what the colonel couldn't understand was what the woman saw in him. He couldn't be expected to know, this simple, honest Englishman, that what Rowley Flint had, which explained everything, was sex appeal. And the fact that in his relations with women he was unreliable and unscrupulous seemed only to make him more irresistible. However prejudiced he might be against him, he had only to be with a woman for half an hour for her heart to melt. And soon she would be saying to herself that she didn't believe half the things that were said against him. But if she had been asked what it was she saw in him, she would have found it hard to answer. He certainly wasn't very good looking. There was even no distinction in his appearance. He looked like any mechanic in the garage. He wore his smart clothes as if they were overalls. But as if he didn't care a hang what he looked like. It was exasperating that he seemed to be serious about nothing, not even about making love. He made it quite clear that there was only one thing that he wanted from a woman. And his complete lack of sentimentality was intolerably offensive. But there was something that swept you off your feet, a sort of gentleness behind the roughness of his manner, a thrilling warmth being behind his mockery, some instinctive understanding of a woman as a different creature from man, which was strangely flattering, and the sensuality of his mouth, and the caress in his grey eyes. The old princess has put the matter with her usual crudity. Of course, he's a bad lot, a thorough wrong one. But if I were 30 years younger and he asked me to run away with him, I wouldn't hesitate for a moment, even though I knew he would chuck me in a week and I'd be wretched for the rest of my life. There are generally two things I may say about this episode. First, public opinion. Wow, that is the great job to get an image of a man in a nutshell. That's first. Second, that is why I really loved Maugham when I have finished his first piece. In my head, it is really contrasting two things about it. A Victorian-like descriptions, broad, detailed, which are unnecessary since I have understood Hemingway's style. These Victorian style descriptions go in really deep contrast with Somerset Maugham's understanding. He's like declaring in all his books like, hey people, love and physical love matters. It does. I think reading Of Human Bondage, the main work of his literary heritage, will be really a lot of fun. And now I think to have some interactive part. There was a princess. Well, princess is somebody young and beautiful, but no. We have just read about princess being old. She said, if I were 30 years younger, I would run away with this guy. I'm a bad person, I would not tell you the description, but instead I will read some of her dialogue parts. And what features do you think she has got? About marrying a person. I've reached an age when I prefer my alliances to be temporary, returned the princess. You see, I have no time to waste. That is why I have such a soft spot in my heart for Rowley. His intentions are always dishonorable. About the restaurant singer. I think it's about time we had a singer. You'll be astonished. He's really got magnificent voice, all macaroni and emotion. Harold Atkinson is seriously thinking of having him trained in the opera. She called the head waiter. Ask that man to sing that song that he sang the other night when I was there. About the violinist. If there is anything I dislike, it's the violin, she answered. Why one should want to hear anyone scrape the hair of a horse's tail against the guts of the dead cat is something that I shall never understand. Her description from the Maugham book will be at the end of the video, if you need it. And now, the central character of the narration, Mary. As long as I remember, in the first chapter, we could see her as a poor darling, as a victim of circumstances, after unhappy marriage, a sensitive person, recovering after some tragedy. But already in the second chapter, we can see her talking. And I think this shows her from the really different side. Look. Mary was doing her face. "Do you think I've put on enough rouge, Nina?" asked Mary. "With the beautiful color the signora has naturally, I don't know why she wants to put any rouge at all. The other women at the party will be plastered with it. If I don't put on a little, I shall look like death." Talking to Rowley. "You're looking very beautiful tonight." "Thank you." His eyes twinkled. Shall I tell you one of the things I particularly like about you? Unlike some women, when one tells you you're beautiful, you don't pretend you don't know it. You accept it as naturally as if one told you you had 5 fingers on each hand. Until I married, my looks were my only means of livelihood. When my father died, my mother and I had only her pension to live in. If I got parts as soon as I passed out of the dramatic school, it was because I was lucky enough to have the looks I have. I should have thought you could have made a fortune on the movies." She laughed. "Unfortunately, I had absolutely no talent. Nothing but looks. Perhaps in time I might have learned to act, but I married and left the stage." "I think you are the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." "And how many women have you said that to?" "A good many, but that doesn't make it any less true when I say it now." She laughed. "I suppose it doesn't, but we will leave it at that, shall we?" "Why? It's a subject that I find excessively interesting." "People have been telling me I was beautiful since I was 16, and it has ceased to excite me very much. It's an asset that I should be a fool not to know its value. It has its disadvantages as well." "Well, what can I say to her regard? She says everything herself. She's not stupid, that's for sure. We can feel that in the way she estimates herself. She knows her values. She knows her weak sides and flaws and things like that. And as a reader, I tend to associate myself with this woman. We are this character and me are in particularly the same age and more or less the same life situation. And I think if this author lived, I could tell him, "Oh my God, you know life so much." What do you think about these characters? Evening has crept into my studio, and today we finished talking about Somerset Maugham's second chapter. We have seen the characters described by the author and described by themselves, their words or the words of other people. So, next time we will see them in action. Goodbye. The Princess. The Princess San Fernando was American, an elderly woman with iron grey tightly waved hair and an authoritative manner, who had lived in Italy for 40 years without ever going back to her native country. Her husband, a Roman prince, had been dead for a quarter of a century, and she had 2 sons in the Italian army. She had little money, but a caustic tongue and great good nature. Though she could never have been beautiful, and now, with her upright carriage, fine eyes and determined features, was probably better looking than she has ever been in her youth. She was reported to have been very unfaithful to the prince. But this had not affected the great position she had made for herself. She knew everybody she wished to know, and everybody was pleased to know her. The rest of the party consisted... That's it.